The neon glow of Neon Haven's black market district painted the world in hues of electric blue and fiery orange, creating a chaotic, pulsing heart in a city that thrived on shadows. The air was thick with the smell of sizzling food carts, the tang of burnt circuits, and the unmistakable metallic bite of desperation. It wasn't just the merchants peddling their wares who clung to survival here. Every soul who wandered these twisting corridors had a story of misfortune or ambition, a dream teetering on the edge of oblivion. Among them was Kai Varen, a man whose silhouette moved like a shadow against the vibrant chaos. His black jacket, frayed at the cuffs, whispered of countless missions gone wrong, while the scars etched into his knuckles told of fights he'd barely walked away from. His boots clicked against the metal flooring, scuffing with every step, a steady rhythm in a cacophony of shouts, deals, and clinking credits. Kai didn't belong here. Not anymore. Once, he had been a man of promise, a decorated pilot who had danced with the stars in ships that now only existed in his fading memories. But bad choices and worse luck had reduced him to this, a scavenger in a district where hope was a currency too rare to trade. His data pad buzzed on his wrist, displaying the dwindling balance that mocked him. The eclipse horizon. His battered ship sat docked at the edge of the station, desperately in need of repairs he couldn't afford. Another mission. Another failure. He grimaced, clenching his fist. How much lower could he sink? And then he saw her. The crowd parted like a tide, murmurs rippling as heads turned toward the exotic goods section. Kai, curious despite himself, followed the current of voices. When he reached the source of the commotion, his breath caught. There, in the center of it all, stood an ornate cage of intricate gold lattice, shimmering under the artificial lights. But it wasn't the cage that captivated him, it was what was inside. A girl. Or at least, something resembling one. She was barely 2 feet tall, her skin a soft shade of lavender that seemed to glow faintly, almost ethereal. Her hair, the same hue as her skin, fell in straight, silken strands to her waist, shimmering like liquid starlight whenever she moved. She wore a sleek bodysuit of metallic fabric that hugged her diminutive frame, revealing a physique both delicate and otherworldly. But it was her eyes that held Kai in place, sharp, intelligent, and defiant, as if daring the universe itself to crush her spirit. She's a beauty, isn't she? A voice oozing with smugness pulled Kai from his trance. The merchant, a Crithian trader with too many eyes and a grin full of sharp teeth, stood beside the cage, addressing the crowd. A rare gem from the fallen Seraphian kin, the last of her kind, a trophy worthy of a king's ransom. Kai's jaw clenched. He'd heard stories of the Seraphians, a once flourishing race obliterated by corporate expansion. To see their legacy reduced to this, a living relic to be traded like trinkets, made his blood boil. He didn't know why he cared. Not really. The universe wasn't fair. He'd learned that the hard way. How much? He asked, his voice rough. The Crithian's many eyes glittered with amusement as it named a price so astronomical it made Kai's stomach drop. It wasn't just out of his reach, it was enough to repair his ship 10 times over. He shook his head, about to walk away, when the merchant's grin widened. Perhaps we could arrange something more interesting, it said, pulling out a deck of shimmering carts that seemed to absorb the light around them. A game of chance. Win, and she's yours. Lose, the merchant leaned closer, its voice a whisper that crawled under Kai's skin. You'll owe me double her price, payable through services rendered. The crowd gasped, their attention locked on the unfolding drama. Kai hesitated, every logical part of him screaming to walk away. He was known for his bad luck. Gambling was suicide. But then, his eyes met hers. There, behind the defiant exterior, was something else, hope, flickering like a fragile ember in a storm. He couldn't walk away. "What's the game?" Kai asked. His voice steadied despite the pounding in his chest. The Crithian's grin widened impossibly. "Stellar Hold'em." A table was brought out. The cards shuffled. The crowd pressed closer. Murmurs buzzing like a hive of bees. The stakes were set. The game began. And Kai found himself in a battle not just of cards but of wills. The alien girl's gaze never left him, as if silently urging him on. Every decision felt weighted. Every card he drew a gamble between ruin and redemption. When the final card was played, the room held its breath. Kai laid down his hand. A royal quantum flush. The crowd erupted in cheers and gasps. The Crithian's many eyes narrowed. Its grin faltering. "Impossible," it hissed. "Check the cards yourself," Kai said, leaning back with forced nonchalance, though his heart hammered in his chest. "House rules say that's game over." The merchant's tentacles writhed in fury. But it couldn't dispute the outcome without losing face. With visible reluctance, it handed over the cage's control key. "Take your prize and go," it spat. "But remember, luck changes." Kai approached the cage. His hand steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. He deactivated the force field, the golden bars flickering before vanishing. The girl stepped out gracefully, her movements precise and deliberate. Up close, she was even more striking. Her presence somehow larger than life despite her size. "My name is Lena Solis," she said, her voice clear and musical. "And you, Kai Varen, are either the bravest or the most foolish human I've ever met." "How do you know my name?" he asked. Startled, her lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "I make it my business to know who might be worth betting on." The Eclipse Horizon's aging hull creaked softly as it broke free of Neon Haven's artificial gravity well. From the cockpit, Kai Varen adjusted the controls with practiced ease, his mind still racing from the events at the market. The alien girl, Lena Solis, sat in silence beside him, perched on a makeshift seat fashioned from spare components. Her presence felt both surreal and significant, like a quiet storm waiting to unfold. "This is it." Lena's voice was soft but carried an edge of curiosity as her sharp lavender eyes swept over the cramped interior. The ship was a patchwork of wear and ingenuity, worn panels, mismatched wires, and dimly flickering lights. To Kai, it was home. To Lena, it must have looked like a relic from a bygone era. "It gets the job done," Kai replied, his voice defensive. "Barely," he added under his breath. Lena's lips curved into a faint smile, but she didn't comment further. Instead, she stood, her movements as fluid as liquid mercury, and began exploring. Her small stature forced her to climb over the consoles and makeshift railings, but she moved with grace, as though the ship was bending to accommodate her. Kai watched her from the corner of his eye, trying to gauge her intentions. "You're not like anything I've seen before," he said finally. "What were you doing in that cage?" Lena paused, one hand brushing against a faded control panel. "Surviving," she said simply, her tone neutral. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, But I wasn't just waiting for anyone. I was waiting for you. Kai raised an eyebrow, half turning in his chair. Me? I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm nobody. Is that what you believe? Lena asked, hopping down to the floor. She approached him, her gaze unwavering. Or is that just what you've been told? Her words struck a nerve. But Kai shook it off, focusing instead on his navigation console. Look, he said gruffly. I don't know what you think you saw in me. But I'm not some hero. I'm just a guy trying to keep his ship running. And yet, Lena said, tilting her head, you risked everything for me back there. You didn't have to. Kai didn't have an answer for that. He wasn't entirely sure himself. Something about her had compelled him to act, a spark of defiance that reminded him of something he'd lost long ago. Maybe I just hate seeing good people trapped in bad situations, he muttered. Lena studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Good, she said simply. Because where we're going, that might be all that keeps us alive. Kai frowned. Where we're going? She stepped closer, her lavender skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Do you know what the Seraphian kin were known for? He shook his head. Just rumors. Something about quantum manipulation. Not rumors. Lena corrected. Reality. She held out her hands, and the air around them seemed to shimmer. Small motes of light appeared, dancing in patterns too intricate to follow. We didn't just study probability, we shaped it. Where others see chance, we see choice. Kai stared, mesmerized. And that's how you survived in that cage? She nodded. I influenced the probabilities. Made it more likely that someone like you would come along. That's unsettling, he admitted, leaning back in his chair. You're saying you played me? Not played, Lena said, her tone firm. Trusted. I can see paths. Kai. Infinite possibilities branching out from every decision. Out of all of them, you were the one who would do the right thing. You proved me right. Her words were calm, but they carried a weight that made Kai's chest tighten. He didn't know how to respond, so he turned his attention back to the console. Fine, he said after a moment. But where does that leave us now? You're free. But I'm still broke. And this ship is barely holding together. That's why we need a plan, Lena said, stepping closer. And I know exactly where to start. Lena explained her idea with a clarity that belied her size. At a nearby spaceport, ASTRO Spire, there was a job posting from the Zenith Consortium, a corporation known for its high-risk, high-reward contracts. The job: transport free unmarked cargo containers to Solaris Base. No questions asked. Kai was skeptical. The consortium doesn't hire nobodies like me, he said, shaking his head. Their contracts are locked behind layers of security. Lena smiled, her lavender eyes gleaming. Leave that to me. As they docked at ASTRO Spire, Kai couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much bigger than he'd bargained for. But when Lena approached the terminal and the air shimmered faintly around her, he realized she wasn't exaggerating about her abilities. The locked job posting blinked green, opening up as though it had been tailor-made for him. How did you? Kai began. But Lena cut him off with a grin. Probability manipulation, she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. You're now the perfect candidate. With the job secured, they returned to the Eclipse horizon to prepare for the journey. The cargo was loaded without incident, 3 sleek black containers, each humming faintly with suppressed energy. Kai didn't ask what was inside, but the unease in Lena's expression told him everything he needed to know. "This isn't just any cargo, is it?" he asked as they secured the final container. "No," Lena admitted, her voice low. "It's Seraphian tech. The kind of tech they destroyed my world to get their hands on." Kai's stomach sank. "And now we're delivering it to them. We're delivering it to Solaris Base," Lena said, her tone sharp. "What happens after that is up to us." The engines roared to life, and the Eclipse horizon slipped into the void of space. Kai glanced at Lena, who sat beside him, her small hands gripping the edge of the console. She didn't look afraid, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. Lena turned to him, her expression unreadable. "No," she said. "But if we don't take risks, we'll never change anything." Kai nodded, gripping the controls. For better or worse, they were in this together now. The Eclipse horizon soared through the endless black, its aging systems humming with a rhythm that was almost reassuring. Almost. Kai Varen couldn't shake the growing tension that seemed to permeate the ship. The 3 cargo containers in the hold were silent, but their presence was heavy, as though they were secrets waiting to be uncovered. In the cockpit, Lena Solis perched on the edge of her modified co-pilot's chair, her lavender skin glowing faintly under the ship's dim lights. She stared at the navigational charts, but Kai could tell her mind was elsewhere. "You're too quiet," Kai said, glancing at her. "What aren't you telling me?" Lena didn't look up. "The cargo, it's more dangerous than I thought." Kai sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You could have mentioned that before we agreed to this." "Would it have changed your mind?" she countered, finally turning to meet his gaze. Her eyes, sharp and piercing, carried the weight of unspoken truths. "Probably not," he admitted. "But it would have been nice to know what I'm risking my neck for." Lena hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of the console. "It's Seraphian tech," she said finally. "A quantum core." Kai's stomach sank. "The kind of tech they destroyed your world to get." "Yes," she said softly. "The Zenith Consortium didn't just annihilate my people for power, they annihilated us for this." Kai's curiosity got the better of him. After ensuring the ship's autopilot was engaged, he led Lena to the cargo hold. The room felt colder than the rest of the ship, the hum of the containers filling the air like an ominous heartbeat. Lena approached the middle container, the one that seemed to radiate a faint blue light. "This is the core," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kai frowned. "It doesn't look like much." "It's not about how it looks," Lena replied, running her small hand along its smooth surface. "This core can do more than power ships or weapons. It's the heart of our ability to manipulate probabilities. With this, I could reshape reality." Kai stepped back, uneasy. "Reshape reality? That sounds like a good way to get us killed." "It's a good way to survive," she said firmly, turning to face him. "If we don't use this, we're at the mercy of the Zenith Consortium. And they don't show mercy." Kai rubbed the back of his neck, his unease growing. "So what's the plan?" "We deliver it, get paid, and hope they don't double-cross us." "Not exactly." Lena's expression darkened. "The Consortium doesn't just want the core. They want me. They think I'm the last Seraphian, and they'll do whatever it takes to capture me." Kai's blood ran cold. "You're saying this whole thing is a trap?" "Most likely," Lena said, her tone calm despite the gravity of her words. But we have something they don't, me. Their conversation was interrupted by the blaring of the ship's proximity alarm. Kai rushed back to the cockpit. Lena close behind. The console lit up with red warnings as 3 ships dropped out of hyperspace behind them. Their sleek designs unmistakably Zenith Consortium. They didn't waste any time. Kai muttered, gripping the controls. What are we up against? Standard Consortium interceptors. Lena said, studying the display. Fast. Heavily armed. And relentless. Perfect. Kai growled, pushing the engines to maximum. The Eclipse horizon shuddered as it accelerated. The pursuing ships closing in. The first volley of laser fire grazed their hull, sending sparks flying through the cockpit. Lena clung to her chair, her expression grim. We won't survive a firefight, she said. We need to outmaneuver them. I'm open to suggestions. Kai shot back, narrowly avoiding another barrage. Lena's eyes glowed faintly as she closed them, her breathing steady. The air around her seemed to shimmer, and Kai felt a strange warmth spread through the cockpit. Trust me, she said, her voice calm but commanding. Before he could respond, the pursuing ship's weapon systems faltered. Their shots veered wide, missing the Eclipse horizon by impossibly small margins. The Consortium pilots adjusted their aim, but it was as if reality itself was bending to protect Kai's ship. What are you doing? Kai asked, his voice tinged with awe. Shifting probabilities. Lena replied, her eyes still closed. They'll hit us if I stop. So keep flying. Despite Lena's efforts, the Consortium ships closed the gap, their superior speed overpowering the Eclipse horizon's outdated systems. A transmission crackled through the comms, and a familiar voice filled the cockpit. Captain Varen, the voice drawled. This is Director Aaron Kane of the Zenith Consortium. Surrender the core and your passenger, and we'll consider letting you live. Kai clenched his jaw, his knuckles white on the controls. Yeah. I've heard that one before, he muttered. What's the catch? The catch is survival, Kane replied, her tone icy. You're outgunned and outmaneuvered. You can't win. Kai glanced at Lena, who met his gaze with steady resolve. What do you think? He asked her. I think she's lying, Lena said. But we can use this. How? Kai asked, dodging another volley of fire. Let them board us, Lena said, her tone calm but firm. Once they're on the ship, I'll use the core to tip the odds in our favor. Kai stared at her, incredulous. You want me to let them on the ship? Are you crazy? Trust me, Lena said, her lavender eyes locking onto his. I can do this. After a tense moment, Kai nodded. All right, he said. But if this goes south, I'm blaming you. The Consortium ships closed in, and Kai powered down the Eclipse horizon's engines, feigning surrender. As the enemy ships latched onto their hull, Lena placed her hand on the glowing container, her expression unreadable. This is going to get messy, she said softly. Kai didn't doubt it. The hiss of the airlock reverberated through the Eclipse horizon, sending a chill down Kai's spine. He stood in the cargo hold, his sidearm holstered but his hand resting uneasily on the grip. Beside him, Lena Solis placed both hands on the glowing surface of the quantum core, her lavender skin faintly illuminated by its pulsing energy. The heavy clang of boots echoed as Director Aaron Kane strode through the open airlock, flanked by 2 armored Zenith Consortium enforcers. Her severe features and piercing gaze gave the impression of someone who had never lost a battle and didn't intend to start now. She scanned the room, her cold blue eyes landing first on Kai, then on Lena. "Well," Kane said, her voice sharp and clipped. "I expected someone taller." Kai's jaw tightened, but he forced a smirk. "And I expected someone with less attitude." Kane ignored him, her attention shifting fully to Lena. "You've caused quite a bit of trouble for someone so small," she said, her tone laced with mockery. "Hand over the core, and I might let you live long enough to regret your defiance." Lena didn't respond. Her eyes remained locked on the core, her lips moving silently as if in prayer. The air around her shimmered faintly, a barely perceptible distortion that set Kane's enforcers on edge. Kai stepped forward, blocking Kane's line of sight to Lena. "You want the core," he said, his voice steady. "Come take it." Kane's lips curled into a thin smile. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of options. Captain Varen, don't make this harder than it has to be." Kai raised his hands in mock surrender, his smirk widening. "You're right. I don't stand a chance." He glanced over his shoulder at Lena, giving her the faintest nod. "But she does." In an instant, the room erupted into chaos. The quantum core flared, releasing a wave of energy that sent Kane and her enforcers staggering. The air shimmered violently, bending light and sound as probabilities collapsed and reformed around Lena. Her eyes snapped open, glowing with an intensity that made Kai's heart skip a beat. "What?" Kane's voice faltered as she struggled to stay upright. "What's happening?" Lena stepped forward, her small frame radiating an almost divine power. "You thought you could control this," she said, her voice calm but filled with an unshakable authority. "But you don't even understand what you're dealing with." The enforcers raised their weapons, but the moment they aimed at Lena, their guns misfired, the mechanisms jamming inexplicably. Kai seized the opportunity, drawing his sidearm and disarming one of the guards with a precise shot to the arm. The other guard lunged at him, but Kai ducked under the blow, delivering a swift kick that sent the man sprawling. Meanwhile, Lena's focus remained on Kane. The director's confident demeanor was cracking, her usually composed expression replaced with panic. The quantum energy swirling around Lena seemed to warp reality itself, making every step toward her feel like wading through a storm. "You destroyed my world," Lena said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "For this core. For power you don't deserve." Kane gritted her teeth, her composure returning in defiance. "Power belongs to those willing to take it." Lena tilted her head, as if considering Kane's words. Then she extended her hand, and the quantum core responded, sending tendrils of energy snaking toward Kane. The director froze as the energy enveloped her, her cybernetic enhancements sparking and failing. "This is the power you sought," Lena said, her tone quiet but charged with emotion. "But it was never meant for you." The ship rocked as an explosion shook the hull. "We've got more company," Kai shouted, his voice strained. The proximity alarms blared, signaling the arrival of more consortium ships. Lena glanced at him, her expression calm but determined. "Can you fly us out of here? Can you keep us alive while I do?" he shot back, already sprinting toward the cockpit. "Always," she replied, her confidence unshakable. Kai reached the controls and powered up the engines, his hands flying over the console as Lena joined him. She placed her hands on the co-pilot station, her glowing skin casting an otherworldly light over the cockpit. Outside, the consortium ships opened fire, their lasers streaking through the void. But under Lena's influence, the Eclipse horizon danced between the shots with impossible precision. Every maneuver Kai made was enhanced by Lena's quantum manipulation, the ship responding as though it were alive. "We're not out of this yet," Kai muttered, his focus razor-sharp. Lena didn't answer. Her energy was focused entirely on the probabilities swirling around them. The consortium ships began to falter, their weapon systems misfiring and their engines stalling, as if the universe itself had turned against them. As the final consortium ship veered off course, unable to maintain pursuit, Lena collapsed into her chair, her glow dimming. Kai reached over, his hand steady on her small shoulder. "You okay?" She nodded weakly. "I just need a moment." Kai's gaze softened, but his mind raced. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Zenith Consortium wouldn't stop until they reclaimed the core, and Lena. As the Eclipse horizon slipped into hyperspace, Lena's voice broke the silence. "Kai." He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "We can't just run forever," she said. "The core, it's not just a weapon. It's a chance to rebuild what was lost." Kai leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping on the console. "You mean your people?" "I mean more than that," Lena said, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "This core can change everything. Not just for me, but for the galaxy." Kai let out a slow breath, his mind grappling with the weight of her words. "Then we'd better make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands." Lena's faint smile returned. "For someone who claims not to be a hero, you're doing a pretty good impression." Kai smirked, his hands steady on the controls. "Let's not make a habit of it." The Eclipse horizon emerged from hyperspace into a quiet sector of uncharted space, its battered hull reflecting the soft glow of a nearby nebula. The silence was a welcome reprieve from the chaos they had narrowly escaped. For a moment, the universe felt still. Kai Varen leaned back in the pilot's chair, his eyes heavy with exhaustion but his hands steady on the controls. He glanced at Lena Solis, who sat in the co-pilot's seat, her lavender skin dimmed but still faintly glowing. The quantum core sat secured in the cargo hold, its hum now a soft, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. "We made it," Kai said, his voice quiet but edged with disbelief. "For now," Lena replied, her tone equally subdued. She turned to him, her sharp eyes meeting his. "But this isn't the end. You know that." Kai sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know. The consortium won't stop. Not until they have you, or the core. Then we make sure they never do," Lena said firmly. Her small hands gripped the edge of the console, her resolve unshakable. "This core isn't just Seraphian tech. It's our chance to change everything. To fight back." Kai frowned, his mind racing. "Change everything? How?" "We're two people on a rundown ship with half its systems held together by luck and duct tape." Lena's faint smile returned, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We don't need an army. The core can amplify my abilities, Kai. With it, I can do more than manipulate probabilities. I can rewrite them." Kai stiffened. "You're talking about playing God." "I'm talking about survival," she shot back, her voice tinged with frustration. "The consortium destroyed my world, my people. They've enslaved entire systems in their quest for power. We can't let them keep doing this. Her words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Kai leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. If we do this, he said slowly, there's no going back. We'll be targets for the rest of our lives. Lena stepped closer, her small frame barely reaching his chest even as she stood. We already are, she said softly. The question is, what are we going to do about it? They spent the next several hours in the cargo hold, devising a plan. Lena worked with the quantum core, her hands moving in intricate patterns as she synchronized her energy with its pulsing rhythm. Kai watched from a distance, his unease mingling with awe. The air around her shimmered like a mirage, reality bending to her will. What exactly are you doing? He asked finally. Preparing, Lena said, not looking up. The core's energy is limitless, but it needs direction. If we're going to take on the consortium, we need an edge. Kai folded his arms, his brow furrowed. And you're sure this is safe? Lena paused, her hands stilling for a moment. No, she admitted. But safety isn't an option anymore. As she continued her work, the ship's proximity alarms blared once again. Kai cursed under his breath, rushing to the cockpit. The display lit up with red warnings. 3 consortium warships had entered the system. They found us, Kai muttered, his grip tightening on the controls. Lena joined him, her expression calm despite the growing danger. Then it's time to finish this. The consortium ships opened fire, their lasers streaking through the void. The Eclipse horizon shuddered under the impact, alarms blaring as Kai maneuvered desperately to evade the onslaught. In the co-pilot's seat, Lena closed her eyes, her hands glowing as she channeled the core's energy. The ship's systems began to hum with new life, its outdated engines suddenly surging with power. Kai's hands flew over the controls as the ship responded with a speed and agility it had never shown before. What are you doing? Kai asked, his voice strained as he banked hard to avoid another volley. Evening the odds, Lena replied, her voice steadied despite the effort. Keep flying. I'll handle the rest. Outside, the consortium ships faltered, their weapons misfiring and their engines sputtering as Lena's influence spread. The quantum core's energy pulsed through the Eclipse horizon, creating a field that bent reality itself. Shots that should have hit their mark veered off course, and the consortium ship's coordinated attack dissolved into chaos. As the last enemy ship careened out of control, Lena slumped back in her chair, her glow dimming. It's done, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Kai glanced at her, his chest tightening. You okay? She nodded weakly. Just tired. The Eclipse horizon drifted into the safety of a nearby nebula, its hull battered but intact. Kai set the ship on autopilot and turned to Lena, who sat slumped in her seat, her small frame trembling with exhaustion. You saved us, he said quietly. Lena managed a faint smile. We saved each other. Kai reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. What now? He asked. Lena met his gaze, her expression resolute despite her weariness. We rebuild. Not just for me, but for everyone the consortium has crushed. The core isn't just a weapon, it's hope. Kai nodded slowly, the weight of her words settling over him. Then let's make it count. Months later, the Eclipse horizon had become more than a ship, it was a beacon. Kai and Lena worked tirelessly, using the core's power to aid colonies oppressed by the consortium. Lena's abilities grew stronger with each passing day, her connection to the core deepening as she unlocked its full potential. Their actions didn't go unnoticed. Stories spread of a Seraphian survivor and her human partner, of a ship that defied the odds and a crew that brought hope to the hopeless. The consortium pursued them relentlessly, but they were always one step ahead, their bond unbreakable. In the quiet moments between missions, Kai and Lena would sit together in the cockpit, gazing at the stars. They didn't talk much, words felt unnecessary. The silence spoke of trust, of shared purpose, and of a future they were determined to create. And in the depths of space, far from the reach of the consortium, a new story was being written, one of redemption, resilience, and the defiance of impossible odds.